Harrelson, parts of Douglas, parts of Paulding, and thank you for letting me be a part of it.
I'm Brian Prince, a state representative out of Augusta, Georgia. I have Augusta and also have rural areas, Jefferson County as well. So a little bit of Richmond, a little bit of Jefferson, and looking forward to what I can contribute and helping my friend.
Thank you, Chairman.
I guess I'm Gabe Sterling. I'm the licensing director, interim status for 29 months. So I guess I'm the resident expert on a lot of this stuff, and you'll be hearing more from me later.
I'm Representative Doug Stoner. I represent District 40, which is Smyrna and Vinings, Cobb County only. Thank God I only have to deal with one county. But for those, some of you, obviously, I know I'm the audience. I served previously in the House and in the Senate, so I've come back recently. So spent many years in this room.
I'm Steve Tarvin, House District 2, parts of Walker, Catoosa, and Whitfield County.
Representative Lisa Hagan. I represent the 156th district, which is all or part of 6 counties in South Central Georgia between Macon and Savannah. And appreciate the opportunity to join this commission.
And Chris Clark with the Georgia Chamber. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for having us here.
Thank you.
We have some online.
Then we have folks online. Maggie, are you going to have them call in, and are there, can you? Okay. Bert Brantley.
There we go.
Hey, good afternoon. Bert Brantley here with the Savannah Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for letting us zoom in from the coast. We're excited to be represented here.
Okay. Trip Mitchell.
Good afternoon, Trip Mitchell, Georgia Board of Private Detective and Security Agencies, and I'm glad to be part of this.
And Craig Knowles.
Good morning. I'm the chairman of the Georgia Board of Massage Therapy, and also a privilege to be here.
Maggie, I believe that's all that we have calling in. Okay. And you also see, well, first off, I'd like to go back to Craig and Trip. Thank you so much. Both of them have over 10 years of board member experience. So we think what they will come into play here is the experience of what it is to be a board member in the state of Georgia from one of our professional licensing board. Thank you both for serving on this commission. Also, if you look at the introduction page, we listed some representatives that aren't here today. At the top of the list is Representative Patty Bentley. I don't see, is she on to call in?
No, but the other one's missing is Larry Walker.
And Larry Walker, I see his name up on the board, and he didn't know if he'd be able to call in today, but I see him. So Larry, if you're there, Senator. Once. Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on then. The first part of this meeting today is really to set the stage, to set the tone for the next several meetings and to lay the groundwork for research into licensing reform. We've done our introduction, so now we'd like to talk about a mission statement. This is one of the things that we, had talked within our office, and what I propose is a mission statement along the lines of the Georgia Works Licensing Commission is focused on meeting the needs of a growing state by reducing bureaucratic barriers to employment. Now, there's no pride of authorship in there. That's what I came up with. And so what we can do is take a motion. If there's anyone that feels that it's worthy of a motion, and then we can have discussions if this is something we'd like to then, modify or further improve. So if there's no objection, do we have a motion?
Craig Knowles, so moved.
Okay,
Larry Walker, second.
All right.
Oh. Senator, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to hear your voice. Good to hear your voice. Okay. Okay, so do we have any discussion on the motion?
Call the question.
Any discussion?
Anytime is when you talk about reducing barrier bureaucratic,
Okay. Okay, then I'm going to call the question. I'm ready to call the question. I don't hear any other comments. Okay. All those in favor of the mission statement as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Okay. The next item we wanted to talk about was some goals. I know that over the years, many states have had very ambitious goals. And what we want to really be is focused in on what we could accomplish without getting bogged down on really away from our core mission. So our goals we set is to hear public input about barriers to the workforce, to learn about the growth of available jobs in the state of Georgia, and to find ways to streamline the process of licensing, and to get rid of unnecessary and redundant licensing requirements. So would anyone like to add anything, or would we like to just entertain a motion and then we can see if we get a second and we can take it from there?
Secretary, I have a quick,
You're on.
just a question, reference the first bullet, to hear public input about barriers to the workforce. For this commission here, we're trying to mostly focus on licensing. And if that's the case, I'm not sure if that first bullet is it real too broad, or I know we narrow it down as we go down to the 3 and 4 when we sort of refer to licensing. Again, I just want to make sure we are focused on, if that is the focus, licensing. The barriers licensing.
Well,
Just a question.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
I appreciate your question. But one of the things we do want to make sure is that whatever, this commission does come up and then presents, that we've actually bought, and have buy-in from the public.
Right.
And so that's why I wanted to make sure that we represent the people. And so if we could, make sure that they are part of the public input. I know that we want other stakeholders, people that are business owners, people that represent, labor, but all those different constituencies. But I think just the people themselves that could maybe bring their personal experience. We want to make sure it does stay focused, but that was what we're thinking. I got you.
So I hear what you're saying there, and I agree that obviously you ought to have public input. But when I brought this up to a group the other day on Friday about barriers to workforce, they immediately went to transportation and workforce housing and childcare. So I understand what you're doing, but I think that may be the representative's gist of his question there. Yeah.
Secretary. What we could do to address that is just put the word licensing between about and barriers.
That's good. And if I could, and this is not
Sorry, Chairman. No, you're fine. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
this is not a thing that would go on the goal, but it would be great and beneficial to me, and I'm sure some of the others as well. I don't know what all the licenses requirements are out there.
The plan is we're going to get a packet together of two things. Later in this presentation, you're going to see all the licenses that we do, and then we're going to get a packet of you're going to learn more very soon about some of that. So we'll go over those items.
I didn't say I wanted to know. Thank you.
For my purposes, since I write slow, can I hear again to hear public input about licensing barriers
To the workforce.
to the workforce? Okay. We have other input, comments? You're number 7.
In getting prepared for this, there's one thing that we don't really have here, that the legal rationale for most licensing historically has been for protection of health, safety, and welfare. So we may want to say, well, is licensing the best way to achieve those goals, or should we put something in here about protecting the health, safety, and welfare of Georgians? Because that is the legal rationale behind all licensing to begin with.
Say that again.
The legal rationale for licensing is protection of health, safety, and welfare. That is what all the Supreme Court state cases said, go back to the 30s and 50s when they first started licensing people. Now, in some of these cases, I think some of these licenses may not achieve those items, but that's a personal belief. This is supposed to be a committee. But I think we want to put something there saying we will obviously still keep the underlying rationale of health, safety, and general welfare as one of the rationales as one of our guiding principles.
So
it'd be an additional bullet point.
So would the additional bullet point go to reduce the redundant licensings or whatever on that front, without reducing the safety to life, whatever the.
Health, safety, general welfare. There we go. I think that would probably be a good place for it, sir. Yes.
Okay.
What about in the mission statement? Would you?
We already adopted that.
I know, but I mean, now that you've added that, okay, I mean, if you say that's the overall.
I think we can,
Okay, we can put in.
we can do whatever we feel like, because it's.
So
we're
without
self-
reducing public health. and
Health,
public-
safety, and welfare.
Yeah, that necessary, without reducing.
Unless you are a lawyer, and then it would be negatively impacting the effect. But
We don't have any lawyers in this committee, do we? Okay, good.
Yeah, without reducing public health, safety.
Okay. Well, either one is fine by me. No pride of authorship, man.
Okay, then that point, any further comments, or are we ready? Does anyone want to present a motion?
Second.
Okay, we got a second. Any further discussion on that? Then without that, can one more time, since I want to make sure I have it right. Gabriel Sterling or Senator Dugan to get rid of unnecessary and redundant licensing requirements without reducing public health.
Protections for public health,
Protections.
safety, and general welfare. I believe that's what the Supreme Court has said in the past.
Okay. That's in there. So Maggie's got that for her notes. All those in favor of that? Bullet
Aye.
point?
Aye.
Aye.
Everyone, all those in favor? Okay, any opposed? Oh, sorry. None. Motion carries. Okay. So we can talk now about some of the challenges that we've seen in our office. One is a war for talent. Then the healthcare industry needs. In the 4+ years, say not quite 4.5 years that I've been Secretary of State, we have now registered an additional, I believe it's in the order of about 65,000 nurses in the state of Georgia. So obviously that's a huge need that we have. Dislocated workers, some of that was coming out of COVID and those issues. And then military barriers to work. I know the General Assembly's done an awful lot of work for that when military families relocate to Georgia. And then limitations for people with a criminal background. And then also, because of our economic growth and all the companies that are coming to Georgia, foreign trained professionals coming here, they work in their companies that they have specialized skills. So I'm really fortunate to have all the legislative board members and Chamber of Commerce members with us today. So you can look at different aspects of all the licensing. So at this time, I'd like to invite the commission members to share any things that they have heard from their constituencies, whether it be the residents of their districts, the licensees they oversee, or the businesses that they represent. What are you hearing about licensing, and what would you like to see addressed specifically?
Other than we have too many licenses. No, I don't have any.
Thank you, Chairman.
So one of the other challenges we have is because of the significant number of licenses that we do require. And if there's anybody that has questions about how to fill out the stuff to get their license or certification, the biggest complaint I get is not being able to get a human on the phone to walk them through the process. So it's you're running in mud. It's I don't know how you would put that up, but it is a challenge that we hear about.
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, I have several organizations back home in my district who work with those who have the criminal background, reentry of people who have served time in prison and are coming out. And a concern that I have had for a while is the rate of recidivism. So I'm very happy to see that you've got that bullet point up there. I think with our prison overpopulation that we've got, looking at ways we can get people out of prison back into the community and working instead of them having to resort to other means to get by and wind them back up in prison. I'm very interested in that. And I've heard that a lot from people back home, actually. Maybe we have a higher rate of people coming out of prison back down in the 156. I don't think that's the case, but I do know that we have people that are working hard with those reentry and people who have also had convictions with substance abuse. They're working with them to get cleaned up and to work. So that's a comment. I'm happy to see that up there. I've heard about that a lot in the past couple of months from people back home.
Thank you. Chairman.
I just want to clarify, as we see this title, Georgia Works Licensing Commission, to make sure that I'm on the same page. Will we get into workforce development on this committee, or just making it easier for people to get, or more fluid for people to get licenses, and that would affect the workforce? We're not talking about workforce development, are we?
I think at some level, we'll probably have to touch on that. I think it's all part of the whole process. I know that we've done a great job with our technical schools, and I know that we've done a good job with community college, university. Then from my perspective, and that is my perspective from the construction industry, it's almost like a skilled trades. That's not quite that technical school, but that is a great avenue for job entry or re-entry for people. So I do want to, we probably need to look at that. And perhaps that is my perspective, but I think that's something that everyone probably has a concern with. I think that goes really to Representative Hagan's comment also about re-entry and what that looks like.
Thank you.
And
I'll just say, this war for talent's been a priority for us for several years. And you do have, Chairman, to your point, you've got three issues here. You've got a lack of participation in the workforce. We're down 10% over the last 20 years of people that should be working aren't working. Then you've got a preparedness problem. 40% of our high school kids are graduating having never worked a day in their life and having no type of certification or industry credential, 40%. So all they've got is a piece of paper. So they're not prepared for these skills and to enter into these professional skills. But the other problem is this demographic cliff that we're facing. You've got 73 million baby boomers retiring in 2030. 38% of all skilled professionals in America are boomers who will not be working after 2030. And if they are, they're not going to climb up the pole or climb on your roof like they used to. And we've spent 20 years of telling every kid they need a 4-year degree instead of going into some of these skilled professions. And so and we're happy to share some of those numbers with you, but they're pretty stark when you look at what the demand is going to be on the labor market here in Georgia in less than 7 years. And so I think all of these kind of tie together and flow through, but some of these critical paths that we need, some of these critical jobs are licensed. And we're happy to share that data as we go through this panel.
Number 8.
One of the other issues I think we need to look at is making sure what is being required in the sense of licensing, because technology changes, requirements change. I've seen in previous times when I served on regulated industries and we dealt a lot of these issues, is that the standards did not change with the times and what was going on in these different industries. And that, in a sense, that was almost being used as a barrier to, you might keep out competition, to be very blunt. And so that's something else we need to look at as we're, looking at these different industries, is that the licensing that's being required actually, it makes sense in today's world. Might have made sense 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, but maybe not today. So
Thank
something to look at.
Senator Walker.
His hand's raised. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
Senator-
thank you, Mr. Secretary. Somebody may have already touched on this. I apologize. I'm having some connectivity issues, but I just left the 21st Century Partnership meeting, which is the advocacy group for Robins Air Force Base, employs 24,000 people here in middle Georgia. And I'll be at the Georgia Joint Defense Commission meeting next week over at Fort Moore, formerly Fort Benning, and every one of these groups and the Department of Defense are stressing the military licensing and the difficulty there that we still have in Georgia with getting spousal licenses in a timely manner, recognizing their license from another state and getting them a license issued within what I think ought to be 30 days if they meet all the criteria. And then also recognizing military certification or training to satisfy or to be comparable to a state issued license if they've got a certification coming out of the military. That's
I think Mr. Brantley wants to.
Okay. Mr. Brantley, Bert?
Hey, Mr. Secretary. Yeah, a couple of things I want to just quickly add. I think that, down here, we're seeing a lot of interest in entrepreneurship, especially with our young folks, as Chris talked about, folks that aren't participating as much today in the workforce. I think we can potentially grab some of those folks if they can start their own business. And so this barrier to employment can also be a barrier to entrepreneurship. And I think the more that folks that we have that are being entrepreneurs and are in control of their own destiny, I think the better off we are as a community and as a state. And I did want to also just highlight what Senator Walker mentioned. I think there's a couple of things here at play. It's what are the requirements to get a license, but then it's also the timing that it takes to get a license. And I think with some folks, they can get frustrated and can decide to do something else. We've seen that in the training programs like CDL training, for example. If the training takes too long, they're likely to go try another job and not go all the way through with the training. So I think making sure that not only the requirements protect the health and safety, as Gabe I think rightly mentioned, but also that there's the timing component isn't too long to frustrate someone and stop them from going through the process and moving on to something else. So just a couple issues we've seen down here that we're very thankful that this group's together and looking to just see what we can do better.
Okay. And do Craig Knowles or Tripp Mitchell, do you have any input?
I think a lot of it is one of the areas that we're looking at for professional licensure that becomes one of the, I guess, the barriers that I hear the temperature of the room is dealing with antiquated legislation and issues that we have within our statutes that are not allowing us to be progressive. We're stuck with some outdated statutes, and unfortunately, we don't have lobbyists and we don't have a conduit to speak with the proper senators and representatives in order to be able to provide a legislative package that would update and streamline our process. And I think that's something we should consider.
Right now. That's what we're doing.
Well, that's why we have you part of this commission. Thank you. Craig?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the same things. Like I spent the last 18 months creating language that went before legislation to get military spouses back to work faster when they move into the states. We created a compact for the nation. I'm not just the president of the state board. I'm also the president of the national board. We work with the Department of Defense and Council for State Governments to create that language. And then it died in the House of Representatives because, the state board can't lobby. And that is a big barrier when we're trying to remove some of what we feel is red tape and getting people to work faster. We don't want the good actors to be penalized with regulation, because we know regulation is there to protect the public. And so we have to think about the bad actors that are out there in our profession. So that's why it's there. So some of that issues is trying to play in between. One of the things we have issues when people are coming into Georgia, since we're talking about displaced people coming in, is verification of documents. So we're looking at, do you meet the statutory requirements of education? Do you have examinations you need to do? And they weren't taken in Georgia. That has been a big barrier trying to make sure in this age of fraud that people are actually legitimate and safe to work with the public.
Thank you, Craig. Do we have any other comments, input? Gotcha.
Just to follow on, it's already listed in the fourth one there, the fifth one rather, on criminal background. The potential uncertainty from board to board, perhaps, of whether or not an applicant would be issued a license if they've met all the existing criteria, if they have a blemish or blemishes in their criminal history. We've spent a better part of the last 2 years working with Fulton County and GCIC on the criminal history. It's cumbersome at best. And so there can be real barriers that are raised and there may not be the certainty prior to embarking on a training program that a license would be granted. So Gabe and I have met on this. We've talked about this several times. So I think there's opportunities for improvement and transparency there. The potential for someone to embark on a training program for a particular license and then apply for the license, having met all the criteria, but have a blemish. They may have misdemeanor convictions or misdemeanor offenses in their criminal history that would disallow them, or they would prohibit their license from being granted, but they weren't able to know that. They didn't know that on the front end.
I don't know how you wouldn't know that on the front end.
Senator, because occasionally what will happen is the rule is that oftentimes boards have to take it as it comes basis. They're not allowed to set, here's my graph of who can get a license and who can't. Like we tried to do with, we've done it with one board, Cosmo, but with the way the statutes are written right now, the Attorney General's office has interpreted it that we can't tell people on the front end, they have to be taken on a case by case basis, even though we basically know what they are. And we were trying to work with the Attorney General, so we just changed some of the staff over there. We're trying to see if we can do a graph, basically saying, if you have one DUI 5 years ago, you're fine. If you have 3 DUIs and drug possession last year, you're not. Trying to get those kind of put together for specific trades. Or if you've ever done, identity theft, you probably shouldn't be handling used cars, because that's where you're going to be having a lot of ID and stuff like that. So it's trying to find those things, but the boards are not allowed right now under the statutes, the way the AG's office is, my understanding with them, cannot go on the front end and say, if you have this, you're not going to get it, even if you spend 1.5 years of your time and a few $1,000s training for it. And that is a situation we are aware of and trying to figure out how do we statutorily address that uniformly across all the trades.
So I'm sorry. So you're not necessarily saying if there is a trigger issue where a person should not be granted a license, you're not waiving that. You're just saying you're going to tell them on the front side, don't go this way.
We would like to be able to do that. The statute right now, according to the Attorney General's interpretation, we can't do that other than through Cosmo. They allowed us to do it in the cosmetology one for some reason years ago. But since we tried with other ones since then, they have said no. Now there's new staff, so maybe there'll be a new interpretation. We haven't gotten deep in those conversations yet, but we're trying.
When you say statutorily, you talking about federal or state level?
State.
Well, we got people here that can work with that.
I know.
That's why you're here.
That's why you're here.
Well, then
Thank you.
don't backdoor it. Just tell me that that's the issue that we're having.
And again, for some reason, the statute, they can interpret it one way this way, but another way, another. I mean, but I think it'd be good to have a bright line statutorily to state some of these things in a grid on the front end, so we can tell those people, don't waste 1.5 years of your time, go get another job for 3 or 4 years. If you want to do this, then you can come back to it. I think that's kind of what I think part of the rationale for having this discussion is to figure these sort of things out, because everybody in their silo sees the solution, but we can never get an omnibus bill through because there's a lot of concentrated benefit and diffused harm through licensing. And as was pointed out, there's some people who like barriers to entry. No one would ever say they do, but they do. And that's the outcome for some of these things. And some of it's just inertia, like people wanted to get some of those things through, but it just didn't make it through the House or Senate. It's just the normal play of stuff. But we want to kind of get everything on the table. And I don't know, this is probably the 10th one of these things. You were on one in 2004, Doug. And I mean, we do these all the time. But I'll go into some more of this when I get into the presentation. We're in a second.
And I see that Craig Knowles has his hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to
Okay.
mention, being around on boards for the last 10 years, what we were told by the AG's office, because I have a different AAG usually about every year or two. It's not so much that we can't tell them, it's that we statutorily can't tell someone they can't have a license unless they actually have an application in. And someone's not going to put the application in unless they meet the requirements. So that's what, when I was part of the Georgia's first commission, a few years ago, I'd mentioned is we could put applications in and change it to where, okay, do the background application first. Then if they meet it, then they can do their trade stuff. So that's been some stuff that we had suggested, but it's about not being able to tell someone they can't have a license unless they actually file an application.
Okay. And I see Trip Mitchell has his hand raised.
Yes, sir. I regulate the private detective and security agencies, and one of the bigger challenges we have there is the possession of a firearm. And we have issues of people who may be a convicted felon, but then may have a pardon, for example. And that pardon may be in one state, but is not applicable to our state. And those are areas in which the AG has to take a case-by-case look at those particular situations to determine whether or not it's applicable. Other areas may involve things like convictions of domestic violence, areas of where they've may have been in charge with possession of a firearm illegally. Those are areas that we concentrate on, and we're not able to say right up front that, if you're a convicted felon, no. It seems like it would be a common sense mindset, but we usually run a context of background checks, fingerprint checks, and we still see these individuals who are convicted felons come through. And we're like, well, we have to stop that. We have to do a stopgap with that. And then on top of that, case law changes. Things run up to the Court of Appeals, things run up to the Supreme Court, and where we have had some type of matrix or some type of at least background to say, okay, this is what we've done in the past. All of a sudden, we've got an apple cart turnover from a case law, and we have to start back from scratch. So it's a very challenging event when we try to paint with a wide brush to get people through, because everybody's story is different.
Thank you, Trip. Okay, I see no other comments online. I wanted to go to the next slide, and Gabe Sterling is now the interim director of the Professional Licensing Commission, in addition to being our chief operating officer. And Gabe, if you want to take it from here.
All right, thank you. Just wanted to give y'all a quick overview of kind of like where we stand in Georgia. As was pointed out earlier, we have about 5.3 million people of working age in this state and 570,000 licenses. Now, that doesn't mean there's 570,000 people. That includes locations. That includes multiple licenses, like you have an RN or an APRN for nursing. And some people have a private detective license, but they're also a nurse. I mean, we have a lot of those kind of things. So I'm trying to unwind that through those things. Historically, we do about 35,000 new licenses annually, but since the secretary has come into office, that has edged up every single year, even through COVID. So far this fiscal year, we still have two more, I guess a month and a half to go, we're already at nearly 41,000 new licenses have been issued in this state. And on the renewal side, most of them are done biannually. So you get a renewal every 2 years. So we're at 228,000 renewals so far this year. I want to give some perspective on that because, I know that y'all get calls and my stuff's not moving right. Everything's happening. We literally have hundreds of thousands of transactions that we deal with every year. So you're getting a tiny snippet of those. And we're working on another piece of information we're going to send to all the reps, senators, county commissioners, mayors, and city council people to explain how many licensed professionals they have in each of their counties, because there are a lot of them. And I know we always, having been a former city council person myself, I always have the problem in front of me when somebody calls, they want you to fix it. And that's, if you're getting stuck in the mud, I can't get a human on the phone. So we're taking steps to do that. Go to the next slide, please. One of the things we administratively have done since we got there is we've changed some of the rules around how licenses are handled. The secretary had us do a review. And on average, the average applicant had 6 interactions with their analyst going through a new license. That is a problem because that's what we capture online in our MLO system. It doesn't include every single phone call. So what we've done is is we push some of the stuff back to the licensee. So I want to put this in this perspective. You'll see there in March of 21, at the 30 days or less, we had 4,733. At the over 365, we have 19,822 just applications sitting there, going back and forth with licensees and analysts. What was happening is we had zombie applications that our people are still trying to work, and people have moved on to something else they want to do or they left the state. So we put a 60-day. If you get a deficiency notice as an applicant and you do not respond to that deficiency notice, we will administratively withdraw your application. And that way we don't have these zombie things. So we've gone from 19,822 down to 647 that are over 365. So that frees up our analysts to do additional work on people who are actually trying to get through the process, which is why we're getting those record numbers of over 40,000. I just want to show you some of these administrative things that we've done. Now, the 30 days or less, we've gone up a little bit, but mainly because we're at record applications still. And we've been at record applications every single year since we've been in office. So it's a good sign. We have people moving to the state. They want to open business. They want to get to work, but our funding has remained the same. It is actually literally, I think, $100,000 less now than it was when the secretary started in fiscal year 2019. And we made about $8.5 million of state funding and bring in around a little over 20 million in fees and fines. Go to the next one. Senator Dugan, this goes to some of all the licenses we have. We have 7 different units. So I'm going to go over Healthcare 1 right now. And I want to say, I'll get to this. I'll have one different change on Trades 1 in a moment. Healthcare 1, dietitians, dispensing opticians, hearing aids, optometry, professional counselors, social workers, and marriage counselors, psychology, speech pathology, and audiology. That's Healthcare 1. Healthcare 2, we have athletic trainers, massage therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, podiatry, and veterinary medicine. And then Healthcare 3, which is our biggest one, is lactation consultants, licensed practical nurses, music therapy, and registered professional nurses. We are in a lawsuit on lactation consultants, so we don't really enforce that right now, but people can still get their licenses. Trades 1. This one's going through some change. The legislature and the governor of their wisdom decided to move the Pels board, which is engineers and landscape architects, off on their own. And we're in the middle of a transition with them right now, working on an intergovernmental agreement. So some of our staff will be working with the new folks over there, and they're getting their own system set up, but they're still with us right now. So you have architect and interior designer, chiropractic examiners, engineers and land surveyors. They're the ones who's moving the Pels board, foresters, geologists, landscape architects. Trades 2, which is another big one, cosmetology and barbers, librarians, used car dealer, and used motor vehicle parts. And Trades 3 is athlete agents, auctioneer commission, funeral service, long-term care facility administrators, private detectives and security, water and wastewater. And then finally, Trades 4 is all of our contractors, which we have conditioned air, electrical contractor, low voltage contractor, plumbers, utility, and residential general contractor. In the Section 8 are our small sections, which we run internally, which is immigration assistance and the trauma scene waste management, which is more of a registration than it is a license, where they basically give us, here's our information, here's where we are, and they're now registered with us. So what I wanted to go over next was there's 4 areas we can implement reform. This office under the secretary controls 2 of them. That's the administrative section and the joint secretary rule. Under statute, joint secretary rule can overrule the third one down here, the licensing board rule. Each board can come up with their own rules around these, but a joint secretary rule does have the ability to overrule those rules. And the final is the statute, which is our baseline for everything we have to do. And I was talking to the representative over here, Doug, and we were talking about the fact that they started trying to license contractors in 1934. They finally passed it in 2005, 2004. And
It took 70 years.
But we have 100 years of licensing statutes and 50 years of rules, and they all stack on top of each other. And as the director of the professional licensing board, it is frustrating as hell because the rules and the laws are so different from board to board to board. I'm training an analyst. I'm training an analyst for this particular thing, because it's so different over here. So it makes it very difficult to administer these things. So one of the things that I would like to see is sort of a unifying principle across the board of how we treat these things. So one of the things that we've done with the legislature's help is we redirected part of our bond from the original voting machines to build out a new licensing system, which we're working with 3 contractors on under state contracts, with Carasoft and CAI, with MTX, Salesforce, and a group called Transform, who's doing the management on it. So we've named it now, it's Goals. It's the biggest administrative change in 2 decades. When we put in the MLO system from System Automation, that was 21 years ago now. So Goals is the Georgia Online Application and Licensing System. We had a contest internally and that name won. So meet your goals. We began discovery on that process in the summer of 22, and we are now at the point where we will start rolling it out this calendar year. October of 23, what we're going to do is do a certain number of boards at a time because we don't want to have analysts working at 2 different systems. So the first rollout will be October of 23, the next will be December of 23, and the final will be March 24. And that will include nurses in the March 24. We want to try to get as many bugs ironed out as we can before we get to the nurses at the end. And one of the things this will do, and to your point, Senator Dugan, it's kind of a dashboard for each applicant. And on the side of the dashboard, it'll say, you're missing this, 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 and this. No analyst, no human being will look at an application until you get what we call the binaries in. Do you have your ID in? Do you have your test score in? Do you have, your transcript in? All those things. If you don't have those loaded, and you'll see if it's there or not, no analyst is going to move your license forward. And we will have periodic email updates to go to those people. We already have periodic email updates, but they get lost sometimes. People have to put in their own information. And we had one the other day where somebody said, I've never gotten my my letter saying what I need because they typed in their email address wrong. So, the real world kind of stuff we kind of deal with on those kind of things. So this is going to be a fundamental change in how we do this. Like I said, we can do the administrative, we can do the joint secretary rule,